Let's get some more on this balance between business and safety. Joining us now, TD's Frank McKenna, the former Canadian ambassador to the U.S. and the former premier of New Brunswick. And Mr. McKenna, just give us your assessment so far on this reopening. What's been your observation?
Well, I think it's been typically Canadian. It's been respectful of those with the scientific background who are giving us advice. And it's also been bespoke. And by that, I mean it's different horses for different courses. In Quebec, for example, Quebec is opening quite aggressively, but not Montreal. Some provinces are opening before other provinces. So I think it's a very appropriate way for us to start to gradually emerge from our self-induced coma, if you like.
And maybe you can shed a little bit more light in that report we had leading into you joining us. We talked about what we've heard out of your home province in New Brunswick with the idea of what happens at the provincial border. Explain to us what it means to have provinces reopening, but also conversations taking place around restricting travel between one province and another.
Well, there's a bit of frustration, I must confess. Golf courses are opening in New Brunswick tomorrow, but some of us also play courses in PEI in Nova Scotia, which is just minutes away from my house, but I can't go to either place. So, it's the price we pay for being safe, but there's a little frustration. I should tell you, almost by way of amusement, that there's some in New Brunswick and PEI hope that we can become each other's bubble. PEI is pretty well case-free, and New Brunswick has been for some weeks now. And we're looking at the experience between New Zealand and Australia, where they became each other's bubbles. So our borders are closed with PEI now, but I think some of us yearn for the day when we can go over and get some cow's ice cream, and they yearn for the day when they can come over and shop at Costco.
Yeah, well, you raised some good points there. Ice cream and golf courses, the weather's getting nicer. Obviously, there has to be a balance, whether we're talking about the provincial leadership, but even the federal leadership, of acknowledging the fact that we have pretty short summers in this country and people are going a little stir crazy, but we also don't want to be in a situation where we are set back and the economy all of a sudden feels like it has to go back into shutdown mode. So how are we going to balance that? I mean, what should we be watching for?
Well, any farm boy would tell you what it's like driving a tractor with one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake, and that's what we're going to have to be doing. We're going to have to be feathering the clutch as we go, and speeding up, and at times slowing down. And I think we can do that. There's no doubt that Canadians want to be outside at this time of year, especially. All of us yearn for the outdoors, and we yearn for our normal activities. But I think there is an inherent discipline in our population. They don't want to get it wrong. And I think governments are finally tuning this with their clinical and scientific advice so that we don't get too far ahead at any point in time. The secret, as we all know, is that we have to have a downward trend in cases. That's generally true in Canada. We have to have testing, and we still probably don't have enough, although we are aggressively testing. We need contact tracing and then means of isolating if something happens. So I think all of those elements are in place in most jurisdictions. And I think that we are reopening in a manner that is safe for our population.
And you've got all that happening, obviously the safe road back to some kind of normal, and then assistance coming, whether it's the federal government with their fiscal plans or even our central bank with lowering interest rates and pumping a lot of money into the system. And obviously at the end of last week, we learned who the next governor of the Bank of Canada will be in Tiff MACKLEM. But even Mr. MACKLEM was quick to point out there's only so much that a central bank can do when we're talking about a health crisis.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that we're well blessed as a country. We have some excellent choices, including the current governor, and the choice we have is perfect for this particular point in time. PhD in economics, macroeconomics being a specialty, great experience in risk, former chair of the Global Risk Institute, bank experience on a bank board and chair of the risk committee, but also has been through a crisis, helped steer us through the 2008 crisis, and also understands the nature of the new economy. He was the he was the chair of the expert panel on sustainable finance. And of course, he's got all that experience with the G20, the G7, Basel, and FASB. A superb set of qualifications, and one of the architects of Canada's inflation targets at a time when we need to worry about that. At least some former bank officials and even the gold market is suggesting that with all of that fiscal and monetary stimulus washing around, that inflation could be around the corner. So we need to keep an eye on that. Although I personally think, as an uninformed observer, that disinflation will be a bigger problem. With the amount of debt that we're taking on, we're going to need some inflation, and we're going to need a lot of growth in order to be able to make this go away over a period of time.
And of course, we basically got a double whammy. We had COVID-19 playing out, as we also saw a collapse in the price of oil. Speaking of New Brunswick, we've seen some new developments with Irving Oil and its East Coast refinery. Looks like finally finding a path to the oil sands, but through the Panama Canal. This would have been a conversation we would be talking about in greater detail, likely, if things were more normal. But how do we navigate the fact that our energy industry continues to be under pressure?
Well, a lot of it, of course, has to do with world markets, both supply and demand, but also egress from Canada has been an issue in the past. And the story that you mentioned is so remarkable that it deserves a lot of attention. And that is the fact that East Coast refineries, which consume, let's say, 700,000 barrels of oil a day, have almost entirely been securing that oil from global markets, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, other markets like that, and not been able to help Western Canada, which suffers a real problem in terms of the differential on its products. So this is a remarkable story in that the Irvings are going to actually bring African class vessels through the Panama Canal, having picked up oil off the west coast of Canada, all the way to the refinery in St. John, where they'll blend it in with lighter sweet crudes. And this represents good news at a time when there's not much good news around for the Western oil sector.
Well, before we let you go, just give us a sense. What's the golf schedule like?
Well, the course opens tomorrow. I'm hoping to be out there, although the weather isn't really that cooperative. This is early, and you can get a beautiful day. The weekend we had a couple of corkers, but you can also get some pretty inclement weather. Today it'll be around 3 degrees, and we'll have a bit of snow, I think, as the day goes on. So, but still, golfers are hardy people, and we're yearning to get outside.
Frank, thanks so much. Always good to get your perspective. TD Bank's Frank McKenna, former ambassador to the United States and the former premier of New Brunswick, joining us.